Hi, my beautiful friends. How are you this evening? I'm going to try to plug in a video. It is very late here. It's about 7:30 in the evening. It's still light out, so I'm going to try to take advantage of the light. And if you hear music in the background, it's my husband playing his drums. So we decided that I'm going to shut the door, he's going to shut his door, and we're both going to do our separate things. But I wanted to tell you a little bit more of my story, and there's probably going to be several parts to it because there's just way too much to tell in short, concise videos. We're just going to put on some makeup while I chit-chat and tell another part of my story. I'm also going to use the Revlon Illuminance that I used in part 3 of my story. This will be my second application of it, so it's good. I'm not really going to make any judgment call on it. I bought it with my own money because I had credits on Amazon, and I'm going to use a different brush. I'm going to stipple that foundation on this time to see how it goes on. And I think tonight we will use the Sky High Mascara. Amanda, I'm using the Sky High Mascara tonight. My mind. I think I'm going to go with this, like this shimmer taupe, because I'm wearing silver. So I have my little angel earrings on. What a day we had. We worked out. We started this morning. Well, my husband took off and went to the local Tractor Supply. And then when he got home, we had something quick to eat, and we went out at 10 o'clock, the two of us, and we set up our porch. It's finally set up for the summer. We lugged all this brush from when they cut down the trees that fell during the big storm deep into the woods. We mowed the lawns. We put up the solar lights that I showed you that I got off of TEMU. We didn't take out the other solar lights yet. We just put those out. And I washed some of the siding on the front of the house. I mean, we did a lot of things. So we finished at about 1:30. So 10, 11, 12, 1, 3.5 hours, 2 people, double that. So it would have been 7 hours for one person to do all of that. Plus there were other little responsibilities that we had to get done. I'm going to get. Okay, so let's get on with my story. Left off with graduating my sophomore year with a 3.6 GPA. And the summer between my sophomore and my junior year, I decided that, remember I told you everything changed for me? I decided that I didn't want to move back home that summer, that I wanted a job. My dad passed away, so my mother allowed me to take the very first Honda Civic that came out to school, so she wouldn't have to keep commuting me when it was time for me to come home for the holidays. She allowed me to take that to school. So I stayed that summer and I got a job in the area for the summer. And I shared an apartment with 2 girls from school. That was crazy. It was crazy, you know. I like to have my alone time. And there just wasn't any. I mean, there was always somebody there. And it was usually boyfriends with their girlfriends. So at that time I had a boyfriend, so we did spend a lot of time together. And then that summer was an absolute nightmare. It really was. The job that I had, I couldn't stand. A girl that I went to college with got me that job at a shoe store. Hated it. Plus, I didn't make enough money. And I just couldn't wait for the school year to start because I wanted to go back to what I knew, and made the decision that the following summer I would be going back home. So my junior year was kind of stressful. You know, that's the year that you start to think, oh gosh, I've got one more year after this, I'm going to be out of college. I think it means I'm going to have to be a grown-up now. Even though I felt like I was very mature for my age, the partying with my friends started to dwindle, and I just didn't want to do that kind of thing anymore. It didn't do anything for me. So that year was a really interesting year. One thing I forgot to tell you was that I applied for work study while I was at school, and I got it. And so I worked while I was at school, and I worked during the summer. Not much happened that year. I don't know. It seemed like maybe I was, my body was starting to regulate itself with the medication that I had to be on. And so that, between my junior and senior year, I moved back home, and my mother was so excited. She did not want me to have an apartment in Manchester. So I applied for 2 places where my dad used to work. He was a foreman there, and where my mother worked. And I ended up getting back in where I was working previously in the summertime. And that's where I met my first husband. He was a mechanic. He used to work for one of the engineers, and he used to build these machines that they used for medical equipment that they created, like tubing and filters and all these things that get used, IVs, things like that, for people in the hospital. That's what he did for a job. And the weird thing about this is how I know it was in the overall design of my blueprint, is I had seen him a year prior, and I knew when I saw him, not at work, I can't even remember where I saw him, but I saw him in the area. And I had this weird feeling that I was going to meet him someday, and that we were going to get married. And I just shook my head and said, where did that come from? Hadn't quite really processed the fact that I could tell things that were going to happen. So, lo and behold, one day, I'm working next to this other girl, and we were putting things. I had that job. I loved that job that summer. It was fast. And I just loved jobs where I could work really fast and the time would just go really quickly. And I was working next to this girl, and we were chit-chatting. I had never met her before. And she wanted to know all about my boyfriend, and does my boyfriend live around here? And, so we were talking about that, and I was telling her, different things about me going to school. And all of a sudden, somebody comes walking over and stands in front of the conveyor belt in front of her. And it was that guy that I had met or seen and was told that I was going to meet him and we were going to get married. So here is this guy that she's talking to that I was told that I was going to meet and that I was going to marry someday. And I was just like, oh my God, who is this person? And they're talking, and as he's talking to her, he's looking at me. And I started to feel really, really uncomfortable. Like, you know, hey, I don't steal boyfriends, okay? You know, I don't, maybe they're brother and sister. I didn't know. And so he takes off, and I said, oh, who's that, your brother? And she goes, no, that's my boyfriend. And I went, oh, shoot. Then why was he looking at me when he was with her? That's a no-no in my book. That's a big no-no. You just don't do that. Guys, when you're with your partner, you do not look at other women. And if you're gonna, and you have to, and you feel like you can't control yourself, you be as discreet as possible. So, a few days goes on, and I was just very happy-go-lucky that summer. And I could do like cartwheels and all those kinds of things that, you know, cheerleaders do. And so I would, when we were leaving at the end of the day, I would run out of the building and do a cartwheel and do I forgot what they called that other thing that where you put your legs straight together and you fly up in the air. And so a week goes by, and the way my machine was set up, it had a heat shield in the back and one right here, but there was kind of like a crack right here. And one day, it was almost time for break, and a hand sticks through the crack, and on it is a bunch of M&Ms, and that was this guy. And he asked me if I want, I'm like, are you offering me M&Ms? I'm like, I don't even know who you are. And so he came over to talk to me, and she was gone. She was at break. How convenient. And he says, I said, who are you? You know, what's your name? And he's like, my name is Peter. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're this person's boyfriend. And he's like, yeah, kind of, sort of. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, she considers me her boyfriend. I'm like, well, are you or are you not? Or he goes, I just came over because I wanted to know if you wanted to play tennis. Do you play tennis? I'm like, yeah, I play tennis. He's like, why don't I come pick you up and we just go play tennis? So we went to play tennis. We had a blast. He had a Jeep. And we just started hanging out more and more and more, and my conscience was bothering me so bad. And finally, and she started to treat me funny at work, and she was very nice to me. And one day I said to him, what's going on? Because I don't feel comfortable about doing this. This is not right. If you know, I had already made the decision that, you know, I had 2 boyfriends previously, and I made the decision that I wasn't going to go out with anybody that summer. It was just going to be me. I needed to get to know who I was. I needed to do Susie stuff. And so I'm like, you know, you want to be friends, that's great, but you have a girlfriend, and I don't feel right about this. If you want to continue to do things with me, you have got to tell her that you don't want to go out with her anymore. And until you do, I won't be going out with you. Well, I knew that he ended up telling her because she didn't talk to me after that. And even though I did her a favor, basically. I mean, my mother always used to say, if you don't have a ring on your finger, in other words, an engagement ring, to be married and a wedding ring, because you're married, you are free to go out and date whoever you want to go out and date. So things were a lot different back in those days. I mean, you know, there was possessiveness and all of that, but I was older now, and I wasn't going to play these games. So the summer went on, and things got more serious, and things got more serious, and then I was like, you know, I've got to go back to school, and I'm like, you know, and he said, of course you do. You have got to finish your college education. That's important. And I said to myself, wow, this guy is different. He's not possessive. He's not trying to get me to quit school. He's not asking me to marry him before my education is finished. I'm like, you know, he really cares about me. Not, you know, he cares about me, not just himself. So I went back to school, and I realized, you know, that I really liked him, because I couldn't stop thinking about him. And when I came home that October, my mother didn't know this, but I was coming home and going straight to his, where he was renting a beautiful little cabin on a lake. And I came home, and I would go straight to his place. My mother didn't even know I was in the area. I had to be incognito. So that October, I came home, and I had gone to his cabin. And we, you know, I said to him, look, I just want you to know, when college is over, I'm not coming back to this area. I want out of this area. I'm not meant to be here. I know that I'm meant to be someplace else. I said, if you wanna, you know, he's like, well, maybe we can live together. And I'm like, well, I don't do that. I don't live with people before I get married. I'm not into that. My mother said, why buy the milk if you can get the cow for free? And I always remembered that. And I always said to myself, I need to be good enough to get asked, will you marry me? So I had gone back to school. Well, that October I came home and went straight to his place to see him for the weekend. And he asked me to marry him. And I said yes. And the following weekend I came home, and we went and picked out an engagement ring, which he paid for. And then Halloween, my mother used to get tons of people that went to her house at Halloween, you know, Hershey bar after Hershey bar. And so we decided that we would go hang out over there and help her give out candy bars. And so in the middle of all of this, he says to my mother, but he used to call her Ma. And I don't know if she liked it or she didn't like it. But she didn't want me to marry him because he had some physical problems. And so he says to my mother, hey, Ma, want to hear something scary? She goes, what's that? And he said, I asked your daughter to marry me, and she said yes. And she goes, so what are you doing, asking my permission? And he said, well, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And she goes, yes, of course you can marry my daughter. So anyway, I finished out my senior year, which was really stressful because I did on-the-job training at the advertising agency that I ended up working at. There were all these deadlines, and I was driving back and forth, and I was doing too much, planning a wedding, and I almost had a nervous breakdown. I had another really, really weird experience. Now, mind you, I'm still on these anticonvulsant drugs. But the weird thing is that so was my fiance. Because when he was 12 years old, he had rheumatic fever that went misdiagnosed and ended up damaging 2 of his heart valves. Well, I only knew about one of them because he didn't want to worry me and tell me there were 2. And so when he was 21, he had to have open heart surgery, and they replaced one of his heart valves. And there was a situation when he was in surgery that the cannula for the anesthesia popped out of his arm, and they shoved it back in, and when they shoved it back in, it produced an air bubble, and it went to his brain. And he had to learn how to read, how to speak, how to do all of this stuff all over again, and that cost him a huge promotion at his job. But he came through that, but the downside was that he had seizures because of this air embolism. So he was on anticonvulsant medication, so he could understand where I was coming from. Weird, huh? Weird that I had seen him before and said, I'm going to meet this guy and I'm going to marry him. And then when we meet, he's on anticonvulsant medication and I'm on anticonvulsant medication. Different reasons. And my mother knew about this because he worked at the same place my mother worked and liked him a lot, but didn't want to see me get hooked up with somebody that had these physical problems. What are you going to do, right? You can't. When you fall in love with somebody, you fall in love with them. The whole person. That's why I don't understand some of the stuff that goes on today. You know, people are afraid to fall in love. Girls are afraid to say, sorry, dude. You don't get every part of me until you earn it. So, anyway, one weekend, it was such a stressful weekend, and at the time, I had another guy that I had been dating for several years, and this particular weekend, he sent me flowers and a card, and he kept calling the dorm, and my friends were like, Susie, you got another message, and I'm like, I hadn't really said anything because we had kind of this understanding that the summer prior, that summer in between my junior and senior year, I decided that, I wasn't going to commit to anybody, but yet I went and visited this guy, and I had another guy that I had been dating. They both asked me to marry them, and I was like, I'm very confused. I'm taking the summer off. Lo and behold, I meet Peter. So I had gone back to his cabin one weekend, and it was a Saturday, and we were sitting down to watch a movie, and it was a horror movie. And I can't even explain this, and I don't know if anybody's ever had this experience, but I'm sitting on the couch, and during one of the scenes, I had a panic attack. And it felt like my body, the inside of my body came out of my body and was rushing towards the TV to go into the TV. And it frightened me so much that I slipped into a really bad depression. And it lasted quite a while. But I muddled through. I still did my schoolwork. I kept putting all of that, in the back burner. But I thought that I was possessed. So when I went back to school, I told my friends about it. And they're like, you need to see somebody. And I'm like, great, let's. So I had my friends were around me, and we went to the where the priest stayed, because this was a parochial college. And I knocked on the door and I said, Father, I think I'm possessed. I need you to lay your hand. I need you to get this out of me, whatever's happening to me. I don't know what's happening to me. And he would say these prayers and send me out the door, and nothing was working. I went back again. Nothing was working. So then I went to see, my friends said, oh, we heard of this great, psychiatrist. So they all came with me. I went to this psychiatrist, and he said, are you having your monthly? And I said, he said, what happens when you do? And he was blind. He couldn't see. He was a blind psychiatrist. And I'm like, this guy's a whack job. I'm not staying here. Well, nobody knew anything about hormonal imbalances or anything like that. And I was so stressed out, and I wasn't taking care of myself. So I said, okay, based on my life, I'm clearly crazy. Anyhow, the year went on, and I somehow it was always there, but I managed to make it through, and we got married, and I thought, everything's going to be better now. We're married. I was commuting to my job, an hour away from home, and ended up finding out that I was pregnant. And then I started to feel different. So I'm going to fast forward this. My first daughter was born. When she was 9 months old, we were able to purchase a house, a very small house. I knew when I was pregnant with my daughter, after the initial first trimester, when you're sick, and you start to come out of that, no more depression. All gone. Completely gone. Never felt better in my life. Even though my body was growing, and I wasn't too happy about that, but I felt wonderful. Physically, mentally, emotionally. And then she was born. 16 months, I found out I was going to have another baby. And after that baby was born, and I felt great during that pregnancy, but I was tired because I still had a little toddler, 16 months old, when my other daughter was born. So, but during the pregnancy, I felt really good. But after my second daughter was born, I took a nosedive, and I'm still on these anti-convulsant meds, and I mean, I took a nosedive. Well, they didn't know what postpartum depression was back then. If they did, they didn't talk about it. There was very little talk about postpartum depression. And if you get a chance to watch the whole Brooke Shields story, she was the advocate for women for postpartum depression because she went through it. And wish I had that when I was back then. But I didn't. And it took me months and months and months to come out of that. but I had to take care of my babies. But I was afraid to take care of my babies, but I did. And while I was in this postpartum depression, I prayed a lot. I get down on my knees near my bed, and I prayed, please, God, help me, get me out of this. I need help. I don't know where to go. I made doctor's appointments. They, you got the baby blues. I'm like, no, this is worse than the baby blues. I've had a baby. This isn't going away. I had a vision. Stood right here to the right of me, with my hand on the Holy Bible. I swear to you, I had a vision, and it was Mary, the Blessed Mother, stood right next to me. Now you figure, my second child was, she was 3-4 months old. I mean, I was working at a preschool. I had to leave that job. I couldn't function. The only thing that I could function to do was take care of my kids and pick up my house. And the rest of the time, I just wanted to crawl into bed. She stood next to me and said that I was going to be okay, and that my children were a gift from God, and that what I've been going through has been noticed, and that help would come. Basically, I would get the help that I needed, but I needed to be strong and not give in to this depression for the sake of everybody involved. So I somehow, do not ask me how, I took out the telephone book and I started thumbing through the yellow pages. And I landed on this place called PMS Act. And I read about it, the little ad, and I called. It was an hour away from where I lived. And I told them what was going on, and they told me that they would see me. Now, my insurance wouldn't cover this place because it was a nurse practitioner who worked with a doctor, a female doctor. And I told my husband, we barely had any money. I'm going. I'm going to have somebody take care of my kids, and I'm going. And I went, and this nurse practitioner, I had to fill out this intake form that had hundreds and hundreds of questions. And the consensus is that I was low in vitamin B's. I had candidiasis. I had systemic yeast all through my body. I had a lack of a female hormone in my body. And they wanted me to go on an antidepressant. So I was put on liquid hormones under my tongue. I went on an antidepressant. She completely changed my diet. I wasn't allowed to eat anything that had, and no wheat, no flour, no pasta, no rice, just vegetables, meat, and that was it. I could have some fruits and not other fruits. Very strict diet. I lost, I don't know how many pounds. And after 6 months, so we're talking 9 months of this, I will never forget this. I walked out onto the deck, and I had a birdhouse on a pole, and I had planted irises around this birdhouse. And I noticed that they were all in full bloom. I lost all that time because I was in this depression. Didn't even see the trees budding, nothing. And my husband, we had to take a ride to go to the next town over, and like, the trees are so green. Everything looked bright and fresh and new. And that's how I knew that I was coming out of this postpartum depression. But not only that, that I had struggled with depression since I was in the hospital after having that grand mal seizure. So it was a combination of things. And I had to find my own help. Well, I took that information back to my family doctor, and I gave it to her. And I said, look, you probably get women that come in here that have these problems. I'm like, you really need to help them. Send them here. And she told me later on that she had sent multiple women to that place to get help. So whenever we find ourselves in a deep struggle, and that's not the only one, sad to say, that's why I'm here today, but you'll hear more. When you're going through a struggle and you persevere with fortitude and hope and courage and strength, and you just keep going, you keep believing, you keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you believe, the path will open up. Even in the most dire of circumstances. So that's where I'm going to end my story, and I didn't even finish putting on my makeup. I had just gotten over this postpartum thing. So she's now 18 months old, okay? You know, she was 3 or 4 months old when I really started to sink. Low, low, low. Well, I was sinking before that, but that's when it got to me. I mean, I had such bad panic attacks, I could barely, if I went grocery shopping, when I got home, I just got in bed and slept all afternoon. It was really bad. My poor husband, he was beside himself because he didn't know what was wrong with me, and I'm sure that he was thinking, what did I get myself into? And so you figure 4 months, and then 6 months, that's 10 months. And then, so she was about 18 months old when I feel like I was fully back to myself before I had kids. And so she didn't get baptized until she was 18 months old. Because I couldn't do it. And not only that, we only had one car. So I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning, get my kids all bundled up in the wintertime if I had needed the car for anything, or to take them to doctor's appointments, you know, checkups and things like that, and take my husband to work. And then I would come home. I mean, I wasn't sleeping. My oldest daughter, my second daughter, the young one that I had postpartum depression with after she was born, she would sleep all night. And my oldest daughter had ear problems and asthma. She was up all night. And then, you know, I had to take care of them during the day. So compound not sleeping with postpartum depression, and you got a ticking time bomb. But Mary told me, persevere, don't give up. And she told me some things about my children that I'm not going to put on this video because I don't think it's right. But those things did come to pass, and they were blessings. So I wrote all this stuff down in a diary. I called it a diary. It was a notebook. So I would have proof that it actually happened. And then when it came to pass, I had the proof. Never saw her after that. That was the only time that she appeared. But that I have a very soft spot in my heart for Mary. She also let me know that we were going to move into this house. That's part of my story too. But I didn't see her. It was a different way. And I will tell that when the time comes. So, the next time we meet on my story, my youngest daughter at that time will be 2.5 years old. And I'll go from there. Okay, friends. I'm not even going to put any lipstick on because it's late. But I wanted to put on some makeup. And I also wanted to let you know, this is really great foundation, you guys. Look at it. I mean, it does feel like skin. It's really nice. I did not like the other Revlon that I bought. I gave it away. But I like this one. So, be well, be blessed, be beautiful, because you are, because there's nobody else on the planet like you. You are an individual, and you are loved beyond measure, even when you don't feel it. Until next time, God bless. Bye-bye.